The 1980s are the decade that I was born in, so while I was not consciously aware of the music that was happening at the time and being released, I still want to talk about the 8 albums from the 80s that I love the most. Looking back on the 80s, it might have been the first truly diverse musical decade. In the 70s, there were a lot of different styles and scenes that were emerging and coming to light, but in the 80s, a lot of these styles became a part of our musical lexicon. There were so many new genres and subgenres, and as we'll see in this list, there's a lot of different styles of music that are well represented, for me at least, in my taste. Again, this is going to be my personal preference only, and personal preference is subjective. If you subscribe to this channel, you'll know that hip-hop is very important to me, and metal is my number 2 favorite genre, and both of these genres, as well as a few others, will be represented on this list. So again, this is going to be 8 albums from the 80s that I love, and I'm going to count them down, starting with number 8. And the first entry on my list is Daydream Nation by Sonic Youth. These guys emerged in the early to mid-80s, and by the end of the decade, they were one of the leaders of the indie rock and noise rock scenes. Sonic Youth's 5th and in my opinion finest album, Daydream Nation, was a truly groundbreaking moment, and it helped shape the direction of alternative rock as the 90s dawned. With Thurston Moore on guitar and vocals, Kim Gordon on bass and vocals, Lee Ronaldo on guitar and vocals, and Steve Shelley on drums, Sonic Youth had seen success earlier in the 80s, but they were destined for something bigger with this album. Daydream Nation came out in the fall of 1988 and featured more advanced production and songwriting, and is a chaotic, anxious masterpiece that was almost a perfect sonic representation of the band's home, New York City. Its 2 lead singles were Teenage Riot and Silver Rocket, which are 2 chaotic, dissonant tracks that set the stage for the rest of the album. The wonderful, noisy chaos of Cross the Breeze, the endlessly interesting Candle, and the Closer trilogy, which is just excellent, are other standouts on this record, although there aren't many slow or weak moments on this thing. This is a record that always keeps the listener on their toes, and that's why I love it. There's so much to revisit. I discover new things with every listen because it has endless replay value. With a 71-minute runtime, this is a very ambitious and long project that can take some patience, so it can be a pretty difficult album to unpack. And again, while Sonic Youth had a pretty solid following to that point, Daydream Nation is really the album that helped them break out and led them into the 90s as one of the most respected alternative rock bands on the planet. And while previous albums like Evil and Sister were raw, energetic, and fun, they really hit their stride on Daydream Nation, which is their finest work in my opinion. Number 7 takes us to hip-hop's golden age, in particular the excellent debut of De La Soul, 3 Feet High and Rising. This is a really unique album that came out during a time where hip-hop was really starting to emerge and become a household name, and a lot of boundaries were being pushed within the genre. And yet this album seemed to be more forward-thinking than almost any other record from that time. As part of the Native Tongues movement, which emerged in the late 80s and featured artists like A Tribe Called Quest, Jungle Brothers, Queen Latifah, Black Sheep, and others, De La Soul consisted of Trugoy the Dove, Pasta Noose, and DJ Maceo. They had a close working relationship with Stetsasonics Prince Paul, who was not an official member of the group, but did produce the entire album as well as their second and third albums. The combination of incredible sampling and amazing beats from Prince Paul, along with incredible rhymes from Plugs 1 and 2, make this album just as special as it was. There are so many awesome songs on here: Me, Myself, and I, Plug Tune In, Say No, Go, I Know, just so many bangers on this record. The group spearheaded what they referred to as the Daisy Age, which featured feel-good, positive rhymes and relatively light subject matter that contrasted with battle raps and boastful bars that most other hip-hop projects showed at the time. For the sake of time, I'll keep it short and sweet. This is just a nearly perfect, whimsical album that I just can never ever get sick of. It does sound a little bit unpolished in places and doesn't sound quite as refined as their next 2 or 3 albums would, but it was a revolutionary album for the positive vibes that it gave, the unorthodox rhyme styles from Trugoy and Pasta Noose, the crazy sampling by Prince Paul, and even the humorous skits, which were a new thing to hip-hop in 1989. In my eyes, 3 Feet High and Rising is a masterpiece and one of the finest hip-hop albums of the 1980s. Number 6 might seem like a generic pick to some, but there is honestly no denying how awesome Metallica was in the 80s. Many people think that the band's best is 1986's Master of Puppets, but for me, the album that I prefer the most is actually their second album, 1984's Ride the Lightning. One of the best thrash metal albums of all time, Metallica's second album sees the band still young, hungry, and raw, and not driven by that commercial demand that would sort of start to consume their albums, starting with Master of Puppets. Metallica had just gone through a lineup change between their first and second albums, as lead guitarist Dave Mustaine was fired from the band. While Metallica would hire Kirk Hammett to take Mustaine's place and Mustaine went on to form Megadeth, let's be clear that Dave Mustaine does deserve some credit for this album's success. Overall, the band here matures from their debut, writing some more technical and intricate songs, while getting a little darker and less, let's put it, theatrical with their lyrics. The title track is an insane, winding thrash metal song that's one of their finest and one of the songs that Dave Mustaine had writing credits for. They achieved some commercial success with the daunting For Whom the Bell Tolls, which is a great mid-tempo thrasher, as well as the beautifully depressing Fade to Black. The second half of the album features face melter after face melter with Trapped Under Ice, Escape, and Creeping Death setting up the awesome instrumental closer, The Call of Cthulhu. Not to say that Metallica were ever really a humble or relatable band, but I felt that increasing sense of fame and visibility on their later records. That's not to say that Master of Puppets and And Justice for All are not phenomenal records, because they are, but something about those two records just didn't really feel the same. Ride the Lightning is a perfect mix of that young hunger and raw, early career aggression, and in my opinion, it's Metallica's strongest effort. As we close out the first half of this list, I'll come back to that indie rock scene that was burgeoning in the late 80s. In particular, the finest album from a truly trailblazing band, and that is Pixies. They were a Boston-based band that were formed in 1986, and following the release of their 1988 debut Surfer Rosa, which did not do so well in the United States, the band was at a point where their path could lead in a few different directions. Luckily, the Pixies came back in 1989 with a masterpiece, which is also the number 5 album on my list, Doolittle. There is nothing that sounds like this album, period. While it's an indie rock and alternative rock album, it has elements of surfer rock and noise rock, and when it's all mixed together, it's one of the most unique pieces of music that I have ever heard. The ironically named Black Francis, who is the frontman of the group, delivers a different range of vocal styles, which stretch from melodic, well-executed vocal lines in songs like Here Comes Your Man, to maniacal screaming on songs like Tame, Crackety Jones, and honestly about half of this album. Bassist Kim Deal contributes excellent backing vocal lines of her own, and drives that same type of male-female vocalist approach that Sonic Youth were so good at. The record starts off with the iconic Debaser, the calm but apocalyptic Wave of Mutilation, and the stellar, dissonant, and anxious fourth track, I Bleed. If there's one criticism I have about this record, it's that the second half is pretty slow, outside of the excellent songs Gouge Away and Hey. But what this record did, along with Sonic Youth's Daydream Nation, to really pave the way for the alternative rock movement that would take place in the 90s, and how these two records shaped that sound is truly remarkable. For me, I rank this ahead of Daydream Nation, as this is more compact, it's more fun, and Here Comes Your Man is just a perfect smash hit song that still to this day I cannot get enough of. What a banger. Pixies really pushed boundaries here, and they ended the 80s with one of the most important rock albums of the decade in Doolittle. Halfway through, if you like what you're seeing so far, let me know what you think in the comments. Also, for a new creator like me, new subscribers really do help me to grow this channel, so I would love it if you subscribed, and it would really help me. My number 4 album from the 1980s is one of the first albums chronologically in the decade that was really groundbreaking and trailblazing, and that's the 4th album by Talking Heads, Remain in Light. This also has to be one of the most unique and genre-bending records that I have ever heard, as the band shattered boundaries by mixing funk, new wave, post-punk, and even Afrobeat in a way that I couldn't even imagine. Frontman David Byrne and the band work with legendary British producer Brian Eno, and while Talking Heads really did release some solid records in the late 70s, I don't think anything touches Remain in Light. This is a relatively short album, clocking in at just under 40 minutes, and it starts off with the excellent, energetic Born Under Punches, which is immediately followed up with 2 completely iconic tracks, in Cross-Eyed and Painless and The Great Curve. This sets up the album's second half, which is kicked off by the amazing Once in a Lifetime, which went on to be one of the best and most recognizable songs of the 80s, which was driven by an atmospheric, danceable rhythm that includes a fun bass line, and percussion that was inspired by the Afrobeat genre. In particular, Byrne and Eno said they were taking cues from Afrobeat pioneer Fela Kuti. And while the rest of the album's B-side isn't quite as interesting as Once in a Lifetime, every track is unique and just a fun overall listen. Talking Heads were nearing the end of what would become a legendary 5-album run, and even with some great albums in that run, I don't think anything can measure up to Remain in Light. It remains one of the most important rock albums of all time, and it took the new wave and post-punk trends that were prominent in 1980 and turned them on their head in the best way possible. My 3rd favorite album of the 1980s takes us back to hip-hop's golden age, in particular the year 1988. There was a lot of great hip-hop that came out in the late 80s, but probably nothing more influential and timeless than Public Enemy's second album, It Takes a Nation of Millions to Hold Us Back. This was a very polarizing record, with Chuck D and Flavor Flav calling out social and political ills over some incredible beats by the Bomb Squad. At the time, this record really pissed off a lot of people, in particular white people, as many couldn't handle the stark political commentary that took place throughout the album's lyrics. Many of Public Enemy's messages on this album take cues from the 5% Nation, which was uniting predominantly African-American youth in the inner cities at this time. And while 5% Nation leader Louis Farrakhan had some extremely controversial views of his own, his movement resonated with youth that was disenfranchised by systemic racism that was carved out by white America, and this album, as well as many others from hip-hop's golden age, reflect these sentiments. Lyrically, this album is dominated by Chuck D, with Flavor Flav providing one of the most iconic hype man jobs of all time. Chuck D pulls absolutely no punches in his lyrics, bringing a revolutionary flavor to Bring the Noise, Rebel Without a Pause, and Party for Your Right to Fight. She Watched Channel Zero criticizes lowbrow TV. Night of the Living Bassheads addresses the ongoing crack epidemic. Don't Believe the Hype addresses the media and the music industry. And Black Steel in the Hour of Chaos is a premier storytelling cut simulating a prison break. The production job by the Bomb Squad is one of the most forward-thinking jobs of the 80s, only really rivaled by Prince Paul on De La Soul's 3 Feet High and Rising, as well as the Beastie Boys on Paul's Boutique. The excellent horn sample on Rebel Without a Pause actually gets reversed in the excellent Terminator X To the Edge of Panic. And really every beat on here offers something interesting and unique. There are some shorter turntablism-based interludes which kind of break up any monotony that the album may have. They give the musical soundscapes a sense of diversity, and this was something that was lacking on many albums from this era. A lot of the beats, rhymes, and vibes of each track kind of ran together because of limited technology when it came to production, but the Bomb Squad addresses that nicely on It Takes a Nation of Millions. Public Enemy's second album rocketed the group to the forefront of hip-hop as the 90s dawned. To this day, it remains one of the most outspoken, political, influential, and controversial hip-hop albums of all time, but it's still certainly one of the most important. Revolutionary lyrics over forward-thinking samples and beats hit like a ton of bricks, even to someone like me who wasn't part of the movement. This album is an institution, and it's my favorite hip-hop album from the 80s. Okay, we're into the top 2, and just to warn you, these last 2 albums are completely different sounding records. So my second favorite album of the 80s is by a band that broke out in the early 80s, sort of dipped in quality towards the middle of the decade, and then came back with their best effort at the end of the decade. That band is The Cure, and the album is 1989's Disintegration. Frontman Robert Smith and the band had some really excellent records earlier in the decade, including 1981's Faith, 1982's Pornography, and 1985's The Head on the Door. They mixed post-punk with a cold, dark sound that they helped pioneer that would eventually become gothic rock. This remained the general formula for The Cure throughout the 80s, but all of these elements came together at their most cohesive on Disintegration. The Cure had a knack for being accessible by this time, so they knew how to write a catchy radio hit, and they really did so here with the majestic Pictures of You and the new wave-inspired love song. But they stay very true to their gloomy roots on excellent tracks like Fascination Street, as well as the title track, which is one of my favorite songs of all time. Disintegration mixes in elements of dream pop and ethereal wave, which give the album some accessibility, but the band really do it tastefully and kind of leave something for everyone stylistically. The band was dealing with a lot of issues during the recording of this album, with Robert Smith suffering from severe depression, as well as a major alcohol problem from keyboardist, producer, and founding member Lowell Tolhurst, who was fired from the band following the album. Many times, bands turn out some of their best work under challenging circumstances, and Disintegration is one of those examples in music history that really shows this happening. I mean, it is easier to make depressing gothic rock when you're feeling really depressed, so I'll just leave that where it is. But anyway, I just love this album. I love its vibe, and even though long run times usually kind of piss me off, this one really flies by, and it doesn't really feel like it's 72 minutes long. The Cure are one of the darkest and most influential bands from the 80s, and while Disintegration may not be for everyone in the long run, if you're a fan of darker music, you will really love this record. Alright, well I told you that number 1 was going to be on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, and I was not kidding. We're going to go from the gloomy, dreamy soundscapes of the 72-minute Disintegration to the chaotic, aggressive insanity and 28-minute runtime of what I consider to be one of the best thrash metal albums of all time, Rain and Blood by Slayer. The band released 2 albums earlier in the 80s and were one of the most evil-sounding thrash metal bands coming out of California or anywhere else for that matter. Their lyrics dealt with the occult forcing the parents of many teenage metalheads to lose sleep, subsequently giving Slayer an infamous reputation which led to a pretty big following. Less than a year after releasing their excellent second album, Hell Awaits, the band stepped into the studio with soon-to-be legendary producer Rick Rubin and put together a masterful, compact record that had some of the most insane production from a metal album that had ever been heard. They take the relentless, fast aggression and the chaotic nihilism from their previous records, and with Rick Rubin's touch, they sounded like a whole different band. The lyrics on Rain and Blood are still very anti-religious and hateful and disturbing, with the album being bookended by its 2 most famous tracks, Angel of Death and Raining Blood. The song Angel of Death did stir up some controversy, as the late Jeff Hanneman had a weird obsession with German history, let's call it, and this is reflected in the lyrics which Hanneman wrote for Angel of Death. The band vehemently claimed that they were just telling a disturbing story, and had no sorts of ties or sympathies to such atrocities. Controversy or not, the song is absolutely brutal and one of the most groundbreaking metal songs of all time. Necrophobic, altar of sacrifice, epidemic, and the absolutely face-melting post-mortem keep this album's insanity pumping before it just explodes on the final track, Raining Blood. One criticism I have about this album is it kind of does run together. It's hard to tell where one song song ends and another starts if you're not fully locked in. But at the same time, every song is a clinic in what good thrash metal should sound like. It's extremely fast, evil, and heavy, and just assaults the senses in the best way possible. There were thrash metal albums released 5, 10, 20, 30 years later that did not have production as clear as Rain and Blood. In the grand scheme of things, it's Slayer's finest work, it's the best metal album of the 80s, and it's my favorite record from the entire decade. We covered a lot here today: indie rock, post-punk, gothic rock, hip-hop, metal. I'm not kidding when I say that my tastes are diverse. Let me know what you thought of my list. Hopefully some of these picks really did resonate with you. Always love to discuss, and I do my best to respond to any and all comments. Thanks again for watching.